Welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast, where we talk about the human side of data. In other words, data, communication, and personal development. My name is Gilbert Eijkelenboom. I'm driven by curiosity, and my aim is to spread insights that you can apply in your life starting today. So, let's do it. Let's start MindSpeaking. Today's guest is Jeremy Adamson, a leading voice in data. Jeremy is the former senior manager of AI at Deloitte and now a VP of Business Intelligence. He's the author of 2 books, Minding the Machines and Geeks with Empathy. And the books Geeks with Empathy, we're going to dive in today in our conversation. And in this episode, you're going to learn how to bridge the gap between data and business. Jeremy shares tips on how to build relationships with stakeholders, avoid painful mistakes that he has made, and how to make sure that your analytical work gets the attention it deserves. So if you want to become that business partner as a data professional, or if you want to learn how your data team can increase their business impact, then this episode is for you. Enjoy this conversation with Jeremy Adamson. Jeremy, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gilbert.
Yeah, I'm very excited about today's episode. We're going to talk about many topics I'm passionate about and you're passionate about as well. We're going to talk about Geeks with Empathy, and that's your latest book. And something that is important is the title when you write a book. And immediately the title jumped up to me from the screen. And I was wondering, before we dive into, a bit more background, a bit more about the book, how did you come up with the title?
I was trying to be as pithy as possible. I bounced around with dozens of different ideas, and I think the key value proposition through the book and the key thing that I wanted to get across to readers and to people in the practice was to adopt empathy and to get away from that geek mentality. So that was as quick as I could get to the point in the title.
Yeah. And I was planning to go to some more background, zooming out, but now you say moving away from the geek mentality, and it triggers my curiosity. So let's jump into that a little bit. What do you mean with the geek mentality?
Yeah, I feel like we as technology practitioners, we really like that idea of being the misunderstood outsider, that there's the business and then there's us in the basement, the misunderstood geniuses that are holding it all together. And we kind of relish in that a little bit. We like being the outsiders. And I think in doing that, we fix ourselves to the technology, to the work itself, and we distance ourselves more and more from the people that we work with. And we think that is good for us. It's good for our careers. It keeps us around people that are like-minded. But it's not good for us emotionally, mentally in the long run, and it's certainly not good for our careers. So I think getting away from that and adapting empathy as a core part of what we offer as practitioners and as analytics and data teams in the organizations we're in is the best way to make a difference. Yeah.
Very interesting. Nice. I would love to unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But as mentioned, let's move to the history of data analytics. You talk a lot about the gap between users and creators. You talk a lot about the gap between data and business. Can you tell us a bit more about how you have seen that evolving?
Yeah, for my part, I think the key theme has been more and more fragmentation. Even as little as 10 years ago, definitely 15 years ago, it was a lot more generalists, and it was people that came from other practices. So you would have engineers, you would have people in finance and actuaries. So people that just love data and analytics, and they transitioned their career midway through. So there was an understanding of respect that everybody has come from different industries and they're coming together. They've got a certain number of years of experience. They've been through the same tribulations and stuff. And we had kind of a guild mentality. I think we would peer review each other. We had implicit trust in each other. Since then, things have changed quite a bit. We've atomized our work and we've developed into these sub practices. So we have data engineers, data visualization, You are a data analyst and I'm a data scientist, and here's what we do and how we play together. And as we've fragmented amongst ourselves, we've fragmented the work and atomized it down into these discrete steps. And when we do that, every time it takes us further and further away from the end customer, whether that's a client or product owner, someone in our organization. So we get increasingly distant, and empathy gets harder and harder to attain. So I think that that's been the big theme. I'm not sentimental to suggest that we go back to everybody's involved in every meeting. That wouldn't work at this point. Like, the industry has gotten very, very complex. So we need architects, we need engineers, we need all these pieces, but we also need, as human beings, to understand who we're helping and how we're helping them, to give us that feeling of camaraderie and get back to at least that sense that we're contributing to the organization and we're not just the geeks in the basement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned also in the book that we need to change our self-perception, right? From intelligent outsiders to partners. And this ties into what you just said. And could you elaborate on that? Because I think that's a super important point. Many people are talking about data storytelling. Some people are talking about communication skills in general, but not so many people are talking about this change in self-perception. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it ties back to a desire to be safe at the end of the day. Like, if you are taking orders from somebody, there's nothing of yourself that's exposed. And that is exactly the way that the current process is set up. We've got product managers and product owners that are out there making decisions. And then that goes to a scrum master, and they cleave off which bit of the work you're going to do. And as long as you do exactly what you're told, you can really never get in trouble unless you completely screw up the technical piece of it. But as soon as you start making recommendations, as soon as you say, instead of this, maybe you should try that, all of a sudden you've put a piece of yourself out there. And if they follow your advice and it doesn't work, now you've got that personal liability. So we kind of shy away from it. And we use that expression that I hate. I'm going to let my work speak for itself. My work is going to be great. I'll do what I'm told, and I'll be recognized, and things will be good for me personally, professionally. And, years go by and we never get that recognition and never really understand why. And the fact is, just based on the legacy that we have in these organizations, our stakeholders aren't really equipped to be treating us like order takers. It needs to be that partnership. They have a great business case, but they can't really explain what the solution needs to look like. We understand the solution space, but we don't understand the business. And if we work together to come up with a solution, it's going to be miles ahead of what it's going to be if, either one side leads it themselves. So organizations that partner with their technology function are going to be massively advantaged over those that treat them like people behind the scenes. But it's up to us at the end of the day. We can't expect people in the business to come to that realization themselves.
100%. And that's something I see with many data professionals. They blame the other side for not doing their part. They say, you guys need to learn more about technology. You need to learn more about data analytics, what opportunities there are, and not taking any responsibility by doing their part, right? What message do you have for them?
That's the pushback on my message I get quite often is when people read my book, they say, it sounds like you're saying 100% of this is on the technical people. Like, why can't the people in the business just learn what we do? And, there's something to be said for that. I think someone needs to be the first one to reach across that chasm and, have a peace offering to the other one. But from their perspective, they've had to tell us what to do. We've done it sometimes successfully, sometimes not. There's no way that they're going to come to the realization with everything else that's going on. Maybe we've been underestimating these people. Maybe there's more there, and maybe things will go better if we just involve them more. I think from their perspective, they didn't get what they wanted. And in the next iteration with us, they're going to be much more explicit. If they don't get what they wanted, much more explicit. So the way that things are going, it's just going to get worse and worse unless we make that effort. And, you can't expect someone who's tangential to what you're doing day to day for you to suddenly come to a realization that you should rely on them more. It just doesn't make sense. I think it falls to us, and I'll say at least 99% of us to be the ones to reach out and learn the business better and the people.
Yeah, 100%. Learn more about the business and the people, because when you understand more about their motivations and what drives their behavior, then it's so much easier to create that partnership, right? Because in the beginning of the book, you talk about a senior business leader, where you saw him as an obstacle, older man, and also reframe for that how you can positively attribute traits to that person. Also can you talk to us about that? And also, when many data professionals, they can probably relate to a situation where they face a stakeholder who says, yeah, we've always done it this way, and this is how we do it here. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, that was the book itself is built around really transformative moments in my career, and the one that you're talking about is halfway through when I had become a leader for the first time. So I had a small team behind me, and when I was an individual contributor, I came to the realization that you need to frame a project to the motivations of the person you're selling to. Foundational understanding, but one that was, hard won for me. So when I became a leader, I was doing the same thing. When we had a project to go, I would talk about the business outcome of that project. And I would assume that was enough because that had always worked to me up until that point. So again, I got complacent and I thought I had everything figured out. And there was this very senior gentleman in an organization that I was serving. And I presented something to him, and he said, no, you don't understand this at all. He said, you and your team, you're coming in here, you're shaking things up. We've always done it this way, and there's a lot behind the scenes that you don't understand. We've been working in this industry for hundreds of years collectively. You've been here 5 minutes, and I don't know why you think you can do this. So just completely railroaded me and the team in front of a lot of other senior folks. And there were so many things coming out of him that it was just indefensible. We couldn't tackle everything that he was saying at once. So we got out of that meeting, and me and my team, of course, we're debriefing, and we say that that's just an angry old man. He doesn't understand anything, and jump immediately to blaming him. And eventually what happened was someone else on his team came by and said, just go ahead with the project, do what we had planned on doing. We'll take care of everything that happened there. So we didn't understand what was going on, but we did what we were told and went through. And we found out afterwards that his reservations weren't around the changing of the product itself or the tasks that were going on. He was worried about his team at the end of the day. He thought if we come in with automation, his team is going to be displaced. This part of the training rotation that a lot of the people on his team go through is going to be pulled out, and there's going to be less foundational understanding in the organization. He had all of these soft things that we didn't understand because we were looking at it just from a business operations perspective. And then immediately after that was his retirement party, and there were dozens of people talking about what a great man this was, and he helped their careers. And a couple of weeks before that, I was telling everybody on my team that this guy was on his way out. He didn't know what he was talking about. He's old, he's outdated. And, I had been working 10 years. He had been working 50 years and made a huge impact in this organization. I felt absolutely gutted. I was, spreading the shade on this guy a week before his retirement. And for no reason other than I didn't understand his motivations, and his motivations were entirely humane. So, very important thing to happen to me, and it's never happened again. I always try to understand the people and their motivations, and not just assume that it's entirely around business process. But it was very eye-opening experience for me and everybody on the team that we don't know nearly as much as we think we do.
Yeah, what a profound story.
Yeah,
and I can imagine that was a big lesson that has stuck with you for forever. And
exactly.
that you will remember when encountering new situations like that. Yeah, and it's so interesting to me that we humans make assumptions about others so quickly. What do you think that is?
I don't know, to be honest. It must be something genetic because it's so hard to get away. And even if you remind yourself every day to practice positive attribution, like you say, it's so hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm sure there's a psychological reason behind it, but it
Mm-hmm.
takes an awful lot of work and constant reminders to break free of that chain of
Yeah,
thought.
100%. Because when in the past, when I heard, yeah, you shouldn't make assumptions, I thought it was always about rational stuff. So, for example, you should assume that someone else is expecting the delivery by Friday, or that next week is fine, things like
Mhm.
that. But when we assume things about others, it, there's a whole different impact as well, because it impacts the relationship as well. And that's why I also believe it's so important to become aware of your biases.
Mhm.
And what I found interesting is that you talk about mindfulness in your book, which is a topic that is at least controversial in the in the tech
Mhm.
and rational world. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, it's funny for me too. Like I'm a really traditional guy. I eat meat and potatoes, and anytime we talk about mindfulness or meditation, I kind of think, now we're going to talk about crystals and horoscopes and that type of thing. So right away, I get my haunches up. So it took a lot for me to get over my preconceptions on this one, and maybe there's a better name for it so that it appeals to people like me. But every faith system, every philosophy has this in some form, and they can't all be wrong. And we even, when our kids get angry, they stub their toe, someone steals something from them, we tell them, count to 10, get over your feelings first, and then decide how you're going to react to this, because otherwise you're going to make a mistake. But, even we as adults, we struggle with this quite often, and we get hungry, we eat, we get mad, we retaliate. Someone tells us to do something, we do it or we don't. We just immediately react to these external stimuli, and we never pause to take a breath and look at what we're thinking with these and try to observe ourselves rationally from outside. And I think that that's really important to be able to see the full chessboard as a leader. Otherwise, you're always going to be reacting and never understanding why, and never taking the time to interrogate your own motives or those around you. So mindfulness is a little bit of a cheesy word for it, but if I can just make it a little more explicit, it's just taking the time and taking a breath to understand why you're feeling the way you are about certain things, and it's much more important than you would think, even in technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
100%, because it's often discounted or thrown away in the garbage. But I think it's super, super important, even if you see it in a very rational way. If you are not mindful of your own thoughts, your emotions, and those of others, then your data or technology work will never shine, right? Because you might
Exactly.
create something that you think is fantastic, but if you don't have a clue about the needs and the fears and the hopes of the end users,
Mm.
the impact will be very limited.
Exactly.
I'd love to understand a bit more, because now we're talking more on the emotion, on the individual level. How can leaders or how can organizations build a culture that supports empathy? Geeks with empathy, or empathy within the organization as a whole. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I have spent most of my career on this, to be honest. Like I'll come into an organization and they have either an analytics team that hasn't got its footing, or they're just starting one. Sometimes they've been rebooting it a few times. And what they tend to be focusing on is technical credentials. We didn't have enough PhDs the first time. We're going to get more PhDs this time. We're going to put more money into this. We were on Amazon. We're going to switch to Azure and everything's going to be okay. And they don't look at that connection between. And when they do, it tends to be by decree. So they come in and they say, all right, this is going to be your culture now. You are going to be empathetic. You're going to be collaborative. You're going to be XYZ. And they go away and kind of hope that that checklist of attributes is going to be enough for this team. And culture is such a ephemeral thing. You can't come in with a checklist and say, are you being empathetic today? Are you being collaborative? It is something that you need to showcase, and you can put in place team conventions and manners of speaking and all of these things that support the culture that you want to see, but you just can't come in and say, now we are a more collaborative team. So I think for leaders, it requires an awful lot of self-control and, going back to the other point, mindfulness in how you present yourself and the way that you guide conversations, because everybody is always looking at you. We have sort of a informal relationship with our reports in technology, I find, and I love that part about it. It's a much healthier way to work, I think. But quite often that leads to leaders letting their guard down, and they act overly familiar quite often. So you'll be doing a debrief or something, and then you'll go in front of your team and you'll say, wow, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's discount this. Or this vendor is just out for money, or they'll throw in these little tidbits. And every time you do that, you're sending the message, it's okay to disparage the people in our ecosystem. Or, someone on our team will start to gossip and we'll say, oh, where'd you hear that? We'll get involved in that gossip. And every time we do that, again, we're sending out that message. It's okay for all of us to act this way. So we always need to, I think, walk the talk when it comes to that. And the other thing is vulnerability. We put on our managerial hats and we sit a little straighter and we use big words and we talk about strategic alignment and all this stuff. We're human beings at the end of the day. Like, we're all in it because we love the work. We like the technology. We like to play around in this stuff. We need to take that hat off. We need to show them that we're human beings too, and we have our own struggles. We shouldn't, of course, go too far the other way where we dogpile on people and complain and stuff, but we do need to act human if we're going to ask the people on our team to be vulnerable and act human and show empathy. So that's the biggest thing I'd say is just, walk the talk and take slow steps towards putting in place conventions that support a good culture.
Mm-hmm. Good tips. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Yeah, because often we assume when we work, people that work in tech, people who work in data, they assume that everyone is rational, right?
Yeah.
And from all the behavioral economics research, we know that's absolutely not the case. I saw you mentioning the ultimatum game. Maybe you want to briefly explain what it is about, because I love that experiment.
Yeah, I love that game too. It's essentially the test coordinator gives $10 to one participant, and they say to that participant, you can give any amount of money to the second participant. And that is that person's decision. So I can give the other person $1, $2, anywhere up to $10, I suppose. And then the other person, the other participant, has the choice to either accept the money that they're given or reject it, and nobody gets anything. So the rational approach, of course, is the first person should give the second person the least amount of money possible, $1. The second person, logically, $1 is more than nothing, and you're going to get nothing if you say no to this, so they should accept that $1. But what you'll find is people are willing to pay money to punish the other person for mistreating them. So they have intuitive sense of fairness that changes between people. But one of the coolest parts about it, and this follow-up study didn't come till later, is that we make a decision before we realize that we've made one. So they've done this under MRIs. And if you offer someone $1, the part of their brain that senses disgust lights up. And then they go, no, I don't want that $1. And it's so interesting that we've made the decision before we feel like we've logically made the decision. And that happens everywhere. So, like you say, we can't treat people logically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess this ultimatum game also plays out in data versus business stakeholders, right? So when I'm thinking out loud. So data professionals, if they don't treat business people with respect, whatever respect means to those business stakeholders, by showing an interest in their needs, their goals, or speaking their language instead of the tech talk, they will feel less respected and perhaps be inclined to retaliate in any form. Would you agree? What are your thoughts on this?
They could, for sure. I'd like to assume people don't retaliate just for the sake of retaliating, but I'm sure it does happen depending on the person. I have seen people who, they've had bad experiences with a technology function years earlier, and then pushed those assumptions onto the current technology team, not understanding that it's completely new faces, and then that technology team doesn't understand why this person hates them. I ran into a project not long ago, actually, and it was trying to mend fences between the business and the technology team. When I was talking to the tech team, they said, yeah, we don't know why they don't like us. And when I talked to the people in the business, they said, this team overnight one day came in and swapped out all of our computers. They put them in a place where frontline workers couldn't do their job. And they gave us no instructions, no training. We just came in on a Tuesday and all of our computers were replaced and there was new software on it. I went back to the IT team and I said, do you remember this? This was like a year and a half ago. And they said, yeah, but if we asked them, it would have been an awful lot more complicated. So they it's just disrespect on this part of IT, and they didn't understand why that legacy had hung with them. So I'd like to think that we don't make decisions overly based on emotion, but I imagine we do to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when it comes to change. That's a big one, and that's often something we introduce as data professionals. I also remember one project I did as a data consultant. I came on a new project, and there was one team member from a different company, external consultant, and I had lots of ideas to improve things with the team, how we did things. So I proposed many new changes, and within the first 4 to 6 weeks already. And at some point, he didn't tell me, but he got kind of resistant. He started gossiping about me. He was clearly not happy, but he didn't state that. It was only indirectly that I found like, this person is not really, when we have a conversation about anything, he's kind of making remarks, making comments about me, and it feels not completely connecting. But I didn't really know what's going on until I heard later. And later, when we had a conversation, I had a conversation with him about it. And he mentioned, yeah, you're new here and you're coming with all these initiatives and you're changing how we work. And I've also set up my own process and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so only when I started to talk to him and understanding his perspective and how he felt about his way of working, then he got less resistant and more open for my idea. So I have experienced this many times in practice too.
Nice. That's funny how it takes so long for that to come out sometimes. We just hold grudges and sabotage.
100%. You also mentioned in the book that it's important for many people to feel a sense of control when it comes to business stakeholders, business leaders. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, it's difficult from their perspective, and I don't think we give enough time to that. If you think of someone in operations, they've been there a long time. They understand the inputs, the outputs. They've seen things go wrong. They're the first ones that have to pick up the phone when a system breaks down. So, they're very invested in the process. Whereas for us, we might swoop in, we see an opportunity to automate some part of this process. We are going to deliver them a project, and then we're going to disappear. We're going to go off to that next project. But for them, that is a huge disruption to their day. They've got something that works. They're being evaluated on all of these KPIs, and your project isn't one of them. So you are an imposition to them. And if you come in and say, in my expert opinion, I see that this is the way that you can do a little bit better. I'm going to make this fix for you, and I'm going to go away. They have absolutely no incentive to participate in that. If anything, they're better off, getting rid of you and trying to get out of the project. And there's no way that you have the knowledge to be able to, put something out there. You don't know what the frontline employees look like. You don't know, the day-to-day process for their leadership. So many things could impact the operationalization of a project that you're doing. And to not involve the stakeholders is absolutely huge there. So, from a base principles perspective, when you're scoping these projects, you need to understand operationalization and have them involved. But what I found is even if they're involved the whole way along, and even if your project as presented is the perfect approach, if there's nothing in that could, cause any hiccups, they're still going to want their fingerprint on it. They want to be able to say, this was a collaborative effort, and they're going to want to be able to add something, remove something. They want to be able to make a tweak in there. So I always try to put a negotiable feature very clearly up front. I think I called it the hairy arm technique in the book. Put something in there that you don't really have your heart set on, but make it front and center, make it a clear miss. And when they're going through, they'll say, you probably shouldn't have that. And you'll say, oh, you're very right. And you remove that. You've got what you wanted originally. They feel like they've made their mark, and then you don't have to compromise on the technical aspects of your project. And I learned that from a photographer. He was a wedding photographer, and he would include in every batch of wedding photos a picture of a hairy arm, just some sort of close-up, some clearly, unintentional picture. And then when the wedding party is going through these pictures to build their album, they say, take out that picture. That's horrible. And he takes the picture out. He didn't want it anyway. But they feel like they've got control, and the rest all gets approved easily. So it's a nice way to compromise.
Yeah, 100%. And that way you involve people, right? It also makes me think of the IKEA effect. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
I saw your video on that. I loved it. I'd never heard of it before, but I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Oh. So very briefly then for the listeners. So when you purchase something at IKEA, you need to assemble it yourself. And most likely you feel at least a little bit proud or happy that you did it and you made it yourself. And psychologists called it IKEA effect because you were involved in the process of creating the product. And that's also how we can treat our stakeholders, like Jeremy just explained.
Yeah, that's so cool. And it's so true too. Like you think back of IKEA furniture, you remember building it with your family, you got a whole memory behind it. And it's, stands to reason. It's the same thing with work projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And to be able to involve stakeholders, you need some level of trust, or you also build trust by involving them. When it comes to building relationships, you also talk in the book about a social versus market contract. Can we talk about that? What do you see as the difference? Can you elaborate on the different definitions?
Yeah, so a social contract is when you are guided based on normal social conduct. So if you're at lunch with somebody, you have to fight over who pays the bill. You have to order something that is approximately the same price as the other person. You have all of these social metrics that you do. If the person gets up to go, you do a little, half stand yourself. You have all of these little niceties that you do. If you're in a transactional relationship, though, it is a zero-sum game, and you and the other person are each in it to come away with some value, and that value is almost always going to come at the expense of the other person. In the book, and I think a good example of it was a daycare that people were late to pick up their kids. So they said, all right, if you're going to be late to pick up your kids, now it's $5 per hour or something. So they said $5 an hour for babysitting. That's a great deal. So they were hours late to pick up their kids. So they said, oh, no, that didn't work out at all. And they went back on it. They said, all right, it's free. And they said, free, that's an even greater deal. So they didn't pick up their kids at all, I guess. But it just goes to show that once you go from that social contract where you're guided by social niceties and trying to maintain a relationship with the person, when you move to transactional, it's really hard to go back. So we always want to make sure that we are on at least nominally social footing with our stakeholders, just so that we have that mutual desire for the good of the other.
What are some ways to get there, to move more towards social contract? Do you have any tips for listeners, especially for people that are less inclined naturally to engage with people who had different jobs or personalities?
I had an executive coach early on in my career, and I talked about all my troubles with her, and she said, all these are coming down to relationships. None of this is technical stuff. And she gave me a bit of homework, and she said, at the start of every month, put aside $100, and you need to spend that $100 buying coffee and lunch for people, getting to know them. And first couple of months, that was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. It was so awkward to try to spend that money and meet these people, go through the small talk, understand what they do for work and stuff. But I found very quickly, once you have shared a meal with somebody, you are automatically into that social contract. When people get together over a meal, I think that there's something very primal to that just builds instantaneous relationships with each other. And that's been my go-to is still to this day, probably 10, 15 years later, I hold myself to that coffee metric. I make sure at least once a month I'm taking a few people out for coffee. I'm understanding what they're doing at work, what they're doing at home, what's keeping them up at night, what their motivations are, what they're, watching on Netflix. All of those things help a lot. And then when you are in those transactional experiences, when you're across from them, the boardroom table, it's not Jeremy's the one that's trying to, cancel my project because he's got other things going on. It's Jeremy's a nice guy. I know that we both watch Shogun on Netflix and he's a good guy. I know his dog's name and his kid's name. I assume the best from him. I know that he has my best interests at heart. He's just busy. He's got other priorities. So it increases the amount of leeway you're going to get from stakeholders. And then on the other side, for me, knowing my stakeholder has a family at home, knowing that, they thought they wanted to be an accountant when they were young and they got into a different line of work, all of these different things, the more I know about them, the better I feel about helping them. When I'm able to, help them with their work, automate some boring process or something, I would much rather do that for someone I know than some nameless VP across the table. So it works both ways.
Great explanation. And indeed, it works both ways. And by knowing more about the other person, I guess coming back to the assumptions we talked about, we're less inclined to make these negative assumptions and instead make some positive attributions by assuming the best, right? And I think this is such a good starting point for any relationship. And I like the coffee metric because it not just helps you understand more about them, but also it improves your communication skills, right? Your ability to build relationships. So I like that one.
Yeah. Actually, I put that on my performance metrics. Whenever I take over a team with the leadership team, I say a couple times a month, you got to go for coffee. And it's awkward for them too, but it's as beneficial as, any other metric.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because it's often overlooked, right? It's looks like it's trivial, but actually it's a powerful part of building great work and having work being adopted.
It's huge.
We started the conversation by looking back at the last decade and how things have evolved in data analytics. What do you see when you look at the future? If you look at the coming years, the AI is huge, of course, especially in the last few years. It has changed a lot in the world, how we interact as people, how we do business. How is that going to impact empathy and building relationships at work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's only going to become more important as time goes on. I've worked with a lot of people that, again, throw around that old, I'm going to be so good technically that my work will speak for itself. And they like being behind the scenes. They like being that transactional unit of production. And you need people like that. You need the workhorses on the team. Absolutely. But when you get into that type of arrangement with work, the only way that you can compete is on price. So if you're in financial services, you've got 15 years Python experience, whatever other intersection of qualities. In Canada, you might be worth $150,000 a year, but if I can find someone anywhere else in the world now that'll do it for 70,000, absolutely. I'm going to drop this guy and I'm going to go where that unit of production is less expensive. People in that position, when they haven't differentiated themselves based on the value they offer, and it's just based on how much they can produce, I think they're going to be in a bad place. Everything seems to be pointed that way. We've got GitHub Copilot. We've got all of these things that are helping developers with the hands-on stuff. And then we've got digital nomads around the world that have lower cost of living than we do in the West. And then we've also got, all of these drag and drop tools that are out there, things that are no code, low code solutions. There's an awful lot you can do with just a simple POC, with drag and drop stuff, with, cloud applications that are out there already and readily available. So it's going to be really hard, I think, for people that haven't intentionally focused on relationships to do well in the future if they don't, come around a little bit.
I completely agree. I would not add anything to that. Jeremy, you've written these books, Geeks with Empathy and Minding the Machines. I would highly recommend anyone who's watching, listening, to pick up the books. I'm gonna put the links into the show notes. Knowing our conversation today, is there anything you would like to add or emphasize from our conversation today?
I think we've come around to this quite a few times. You've used this expression, positive attribution, and we never talked about it directly. If you can come away, I think, from this conversation with one thing you're going to do different in your day-to-day life, I think that would be it. Just assume the best about your stakeholders. No one's out there to be a bad guy. You may be in conflict with them on projects, but at the end of the day, you're all, pulling in the same direction. You're all working for the same company. Understand them, assume the best, hope they'll do the same for you. You'll be better professionally and personally for it. So if there's one takeaway, I think that would be it. And I absolutely loved being on the show. I love your book as well. It was inspiration for Minding the Machines. And I really appreciate the invitation and the chance to chat.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining. As a last question, where can people follow you, or where can people learn more about you?
LinkedIn is where I'm most active, and the book is available on Amazon.
Fantastic. I'll include the links in the show notes. Again, thank you very much for joining the conversation today. And also thank you for teaming up with me, because that's how it feels like in our aim to humanize data in order to bridge the gap, to help empower data professionals, technology professionals to take that responsibility and come a bit closer to the business, because that's what helps yourself and that's also what helps the organization as a whole. So I think it's a beautiful cause, and I'm happy to hear about your work. So thank you very much again for today.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right. Have a good day, Jeremy.
You too.
Do you want people to listen to your data and increase your business impact? Then take my free email course or do the quick self-test of your data communication skills. Go to mindspeaking.com and start learning today.